The Intergalactic Species Classification Bureau had always prided itself on maintaining the most comprehensive database of dangerous life forms in known space. For 3 centuries, their risk assessment algorithms had kept civilized worlds safe from the countless horrors lurking in the cosmic dark. At the very top of their meticulously maintained list sat the Vrexal, a species so terrifyingly efficient at ending lives that most sentient beings couldn't even pronounce their name without involuntary bladder evacuation. The Vrex possessed every quality that evolution seemed to enjoy gifting to its most sadistic creations. Razor-sharp fangs capable of puncturing starship hull plating, crushing jaw strength that could snap the neck of a Kandorian battle rhino with the casual ease of opening a particularly stubborn jar of pickles, lightning reflexes that made professional assassins look like arthritic grandmothers attempting ballet, and perhaps most unsettling of all, an intelligence that suggested they'd derived genuine pleasure from the hunt. Even the most battle-hardened Zephyrian shock troops, beings who considered recreational warfare a quaint hobby, would cross 3 star systems to avoid a single Vrex sighting. The Thrakari, whose entire culture revolved around proving one's worth through combat, had an ancient proverb roughly translating to, better to face a supernova naked than meet a Vrex while clothed. It lost something in translation, but the sentiment remained. This universal terror had shaped galactic politics for millennia. Trade routes curved around Vrex territories like water around a stone. Entire sectors remained unexplored simply because long-range sensors had detected what might possibly be Vrex paw prints on a distant moon. The mere rumor of Vrex presence could crash interstellar markets faster than news of an impending black hole collision, which made the discovery of humanity's relationship with these apex predators somewhat problematic. The first indication that something was amiss came during routine first contact protocols with the newly discovered human homeworld. Ambassador Kethril of the Altarian Diplomatic Corps, a being whose species had perfected the art of cautious pessimism over 14,000 years of galactic politics, had been conducting the standard preliminary survey. Everything seemed disappointingly normal. Humans appeared to be another unremarkable bipedal species with delusions of technological grandeur and an unhealthy obsession with carbonated beverages. Then the human representative mentioned, with the sort of casual indifference typically reserved for discussing weather patterns, that they would need to make special arrangements for their companion animals during any future diplomatic visits. Kethril's primary concern had been the usual bureaucratic nightmare of alien pet allergies and incompatible atmospheric requirements. His species had learned long ago that nothing derailed interspecies negotiations quite like an allergic reaction to someone's beloved quasi-sentient fungus colony. Standard procedure dictated a polite inquiry about the nature of these companions, followed by the appropriate forms filed in triplicate. "Oh, they're called canines," the human had explained helpfully, "though we usually just call them our faithful friends. Wonderful creatures, been with us for thousands of years, very loyal, excellent judges of character, fantastic with children." This sounded refreshingly mundane. Most species' companion animals were either bioluminescent parasites or possessed an alarming tendency towards spontaneous cellular multiplication. Kethril had begun mentally preparing the standard diplomatic pet accommodation protocols when the human helpfully transmitted a visual reference file. The image that appeared on Kethril's display screen would later require 17 different forms of psychological counseling to fully process. Staring back at him with what could only be described as a friendly expression if one were feeling particularly generous with their interpretation of facial expressions was a Vrex. Not just any Vrex, but one sitting calmly next to a small human offspring who appeared to be using the galaxy's most feared predator as an impromptu pillow. Kethril's reaction was immediate and visceral. His species' natural flight response, honed by millions of years of avoiding things with more teeth than good sense, triggered with such intensity that he accidentally ejected himself through the nearest emergency airlock. Only quick thinking by his security detail prevented the galaxy's first recorded case of diplomatic death by involuntary space exposure. After being retrieved from the cold vacuum of space and treated for acute psychological trauma, Kethril found himself faced with a disturbing question. How exactly did a species that appeared to struggle with opening simple food containers manage to domesticate the galaxy's apex predator. The initial assumption, shared by every rational being who reviewed the evidence, was that this had to be some sort of elaborate hoax. Perhaps the humans were attempting to intimidate potential adversaries by claiming dominion over creatures they obviously feared as much as everyone else. It was a reasonably clever psychological warfare tactic, assuming anyone was gullible enough to believe it. Unfortunately for galactic sanity, additional evidence began accumulating at an alarming rate. Surveillance footage from human settlements revealed not just one or two Vrex living peacefully among humans, but thousands of them, millions even. They wandered freely through human cities, accompanied human children to educational facilities, and, most disturbing of all, seemed to genuinely enjoy it. The implications were staggering. If humans had somehow managed to tame the most dangerous predators in known space, what did that suggest about humanity's own predatory capabilities? The thought kept career diplomats awake at night, staring at their sealing units and wondering if they'd made a terrible mistake in assuming humans were just another harmless species with pretensions of galactic relevance. Emergency sessions were called. Xenobiologists were consulted. Ancient texts were referenced. Several minor religious cults declared the end times had arrived and began stockpiling canned goods with an enthusiasm that bordered on the pathological. Through it all, the humans remained blissfully unaware that their casual mention of household pets had triggered the greatest existential crisis in galactic political history. They continued their standard first contact procedures with the sort of bureaucratic efficiency that suggested they were either remarkably naive or possessed a level of confidence that bordered on the supernatural. The evidence, however, refused to be explained away by conventional wisdom or desperate hope. Frame after frame of surveillance data showed the same impossible reality: humans living in harmony with creatures that could end their existence with a casual yawn, children playing games that involved grabbing the Vrex by their most dangerous appendages, adults casually issuing commands that the galaxy's most feared predators seemed eager to obey. As the full scope of this revelation began to sink in among the galactic community, one question emerged with crystalline clarity. If humans could casually domesticate the Vrex, what other capabilities might they be hiding behind their seemingly innocuous exterior? The answer to that question would prove far more disturbing than anyone could have possibly imagined. The Xenobiological Research Institute had built its reputation on methodical, rational analysis of the galaxy's most dangerous life forms. Their scientists approached each new discovery with the sort of clinical detachment that came from years of studying things that could kill you in increasingly creative ways. They had dissected the feeding habits of void-dwelling plasma wraiths, mapped the territorial behavior of crystalline hive minds, and published award-winning papers on the mating rituals of sentient black holes. None of their extensive training had prepared them for the human situation. Dr. Vekthara, the Institute's leading expert on apex predator psychology, found herself staring at hours of surveillance footage with the growing suspicion that either her equipment was malfunctioning or reality itself had developed a severe glitch. The data streams from human settlements painted a picture so fundamentally at odds with everything known about Vrex behavior that she had run the analysis algorithm 17 times, hoping for different results. The algorithms, with their typical lack of diplomatic tact, continued to insist that the footage was authentic. Perhaps, suggested her research assistant, a young Calaxian whose species specialized in finding rational explanations for impossible phenomena, the humans have developed some form of mind control technology, neural inhibitors that suppress the Vrex natural predatory instincts. Dr. Vekthar appreciated the suggestion, even though it failed to account for the more disturbing aspects of the footage. Mind control might explain why the Vex weren't dismembering their supposed captors, but it hardly explained why they seemed to be enjoying themselves. The creatures in the surveillance videos displayed body language consistent with contentment, playfulness, and what could only be described as affection. The research team had spent weeks cataloguing these impossible behaviors, Vrex voluntarily retrieving objects thrown by humans and returning them for no apparent reason other than the pleasure of repetition. Vrex allowing human offspring to climb upon their backs and pull their ears with the sort of casual disregard for personal safety that typically preceded tragic obituaries. Most bewildering of all, Vrex appearing to seek out human attention and approval with an enthusiasm that suggested they had somehow forgotten their status as the galaxy's most feared predators. The neural scans are even more confusing, reported Dr. Zephytos, whose cybernetic implants allowed him to interface directly with the Institute's most sophisticated analytical equipment. The Vrex brain patterns show elevated levels of dopamine and serotonin, chemicals associated with pleasure and satisfaction. Either these creatures are experiencing chronic euphoria, or they genuinely enjoy their relationship with the humans. The implications of this discovery had triggered an emergency consultation with the Institute's philosophers, who specialized in grappling with concepts that threatened to break rational minds. After 3 days of intensive meditation and several nervous breakdowns, they had reluctantly concluded that the evidence pointed toward a single, terrifying possibility. The humans had somehow convinced the galaxy's apex predators that servitude was preferable to freedom. This raised uncomfortable questions about human persuasive capabilities that kept the research team awake during their designated rest cycles. Further investigation revealed that the human-Vrex relationship wasn't a recent development, as initially hoped by those clinging to the possibility that this was some sort of temporary aberration. Archaeological evidence suggested that humans had been living alongside Vrex for thousands of their years, a time span that encompassed the rise and fall of several galactic civilizations. Even more disturbing was the discovery that humans had apparently shaped the evolution of their Vrex companions through selective breeding programs. The creatures living in human settlements displayed a bewildering variety of physical characteristics that bore little resemblance to their wild counterparts. Some were barely larger than common household vermin, while others had grown to sizes that would make a Kandorian battle rhino reconsider its life choices. The humans had somehow managed to take the galaxy's most perfect killing machine and redesign it according to their aesthetic preferences and practical needs. They had bred Vrex for enhanced loyalty, modified sensory capabilities, specialized hunting skills, and most incomprehensibly, purely cosmetic variations that served no apparent purpose other than human amusement. They've created Vrex with fur patterns that spell out words in human languages, Dr. Vexthara reported to her increasingly disturbed colleagues during their daily briefing. Others have been bred for abnormally small stature and what can only be described as cute facial features. The humans appear to find these modifications entertaining. The concept of modifying an apex predator for entertainment purposes struck the research team as evidence of either supreme confidence or complete insanity, possibly both. Additional data streams revealed that humans had developed an entire industry around their Vrex companions. Specialized facilities existed for their care and training. Humans exchanged currency for products designed to enhance Vrex comfort and appearance. They had created competitions where Vrex demonstrated various skills, while humans observed and awarded prizes based on performance criteria that seemed to change arbitrarily. Most unsettling of all was the discovery that humans spoke to their Vrex companions using vocalizations typically reserved for addressing juvenile members of their own species. The tone patterns suggested affection, approval, and emotional attachment that bordered on the pathological. The psychological profiles are unprecedented, reported Dr. Calfex, whose species had pioneered the field of interspecies behavioral analysis. Humans display emotional responses to their Vrex companions that mirror those observed in parent-offspring relationships. They express distress when separated from these creatures, celebrate their achievements, and appear to derive genuine happiness from their presence. This emotional investment seemed to be reciprocated by the Vrex, who had somehow learned to interpret human vocal patterns and respond appropriately. They demonstrated behaviors that suggested they could predict human moods, anticipate human needs, and actively seek to improve human emotional states through various forms of physical contact and performative activities. The research team had initially assumed that this relationship represented some form of sophisticated slavery, with humans maintaining dominance through superior technology or psychological manipulation. However, Detailed behavioral analysis suggested something far more complex and disturbing. The relationship appeared to be genuinely symbiotic, with both species deriving mutual benefit from their association. This revelation had prompted emergency consultations with experts in evolutionary psychology, xenosociology, and theoretical predator dynamics. Their collective conclusion was as unanimous as it was terrifying. Any species capable of establishing such a relationship with apex predators possessed capabilities that defied conventional understanding of interspecies power dynamics. The implications extended far beyond academic curiosity. If humans could domesticate Vrex, what other supposedly dangerous species might they have similarly conquered? What predatory instincts might they themselves possess that allowed them to achieve what no other known civilization had even attempted? As the research team compiled their findings into what would become the most classified document in galactic history, one fact emerged with crystalline clarity. Humanity's casual mastery over the galaxy's most feared predators suggested they might themselves be far more dangerous than anyone had previously imagined. The question was no longer how humans had managed to domesticate the Vrex. The question was what other impossible feats they might accomplish once they decided to turn their attention to the rest of the galaxy. The Historical Archives Division of the Galactic Library had always considered itself the repository of civilization's greatest achievements and most embarrassing failures. Their climate-controlled vaults contained the cultural records of thousands of species, documenting everything from the invention of faster-than-light travel to the regrettable period when the Zorblatians decided that sentient furniture was the future of interior design. What they'd discovered about human history, however, made the Zorblatian furniture uprising look like a minor decorating mishap. Chief Archivist Thalaris had begun the investigation, expecting to find evidence of humanity's first contact with Vrex, perhaps a desperate last stand against overwhelming predatory forces, or the discovery of some ancient technology that allowed them to establish dominance through superior firepower. Instead, the historical records painted a picture so comprehensively disturbing that she had temporarily considered a career change to something less psychologically damaging, like professional asteroid mining. The humans, it appeared, had not discovered the Vrex. They had created them. Archaeological evidence from the human homeworld suggested that thousands of years ago humans had encountered wild Vrex and, rather than fleeing like any sensible species, had apparently looked at these apex predators and thought these would make excellent companions with a few minor modifications. The selective breeding programs that followed represented a masterclass in genetic manipulation that would have impressed the galaxy's most advanced bioengineers. But the Vrex were merely the beginning of humanity's campaign against the natural order. Further research revealed that humans had systematically identified every dangerous predator on their homeworld and methodically bent them to their will through a combination of selective breeding, behavioral conditioning, and what could only be described as weaponized friendship. The list of conquered species read like a nightmare catalogue of evolutionary perfection gone horribly wrong. They had domesticated aerial predators with razor-sharp talons and hunting instincts that could track prey across continents, transforming them into message carriers and aerial display performers. They had tamed massive predators whose crushing bite force could snap trees in half, turning them into transportation and agricultural assistants. They had even domesticated micropredators, whose venom could kill creatures 1,000 times their size, convincing them to produce silk for human textile industries. The scope is unprecedented, Thelvaris reported to the Emergency Assembly of Senior Archivists, her voice carrying the hollow tone of someone whose worldview had been systematically demolished by historical evidence. They didn't just domesticate one or two species. They appear to have targeted every apex predator in their ecosystem and convinced them that serving humanity was their evolutionary destiny. The psychological profiles of these conquered species revealed the same disturbing patterns observed in the Vrex: enhanced loyalty beyond species norms, behavioral modifications that prioritized human welfare over their own survival instincts, emotional attachment to their human companions that bordered on the pathological. Even more unsettling was the discovery that humans had developed specialized variants of their domesticated predators for increasingly specific purposes. They had bred aerial predators for enhanced speed, others for improved cargo capacity, and still others purely for aesthetic appeal. They had created aquatic predators capable of retrieving objects from underwater environments, land predators specialized for tracking specific scents across vast distances, and micro-predators whose sole purpose appeared to be eliminating other micro-predators that humans found inconvenient. The humans had essentially turned their entire planet into a biological weapons laboratory, where every dangerous creature had been repurposed to serve human interests. But perhaps most disturbing of all was the discovery that humans had developed emotional attachments to these creatures that seemed to mirror the bonds typically reserved for family members. Historical records contain countless examples of humans risking their lives to protect their predatory companions, mourning their deaths with the sort of grief typically associated with losing offspring, and creating elaborate memorial structures to commemorate particularly beloved specimens. This emotional investment had apparently motivated humans to push the boundaries of genetic modification even further. They had created predators capable of detecting human diseases through scent analysis. Others had been modified to provide emotional support during periods of psychological distress. Some had been bred specifically to interact safely with human children, despite retaining all the physical capabilities necessary to end those same children's lives in seconds. The implications were staggering. Any species capable of establishing such complex emotional relationships with apex predators, while simultaneously modifying them for specialized purposes, possessed a combination of technical sophistication and psychological dominance that defied conventional understanding of interspecies dynamics. Additional research revealed that humans had extended this pattern beyond their homeworld. As they began exploring their local star system, they had encountered additional predatory species and promptly began the same process of domestication and modification. Space-dwelling creatures that fed on cosmic radiation had been convinced to serve as living radiation detectors. Predators adapted to extreme cold environments had been recruited as exploration companions for frozen worlds. The humans appeared to view the galaxy not as a dangerous frontier populated by creatures that could kill them, but as a vast collection of potential companions waiting to be recruited into their ever-expanding menagerie of domesticated apex predators. "They are not conquering through military force," Dr. Kelthax observed during a joint session between the Historical Archives and the Xenobiological Institute. "They're conquering through friendship. They're turning the galaxy's most dangerous creatures into willing collaborators by convincing them that serving humanity is the most fulfilling possible existence." This realization had triggered a fundamental reassessment of humanity's threat potential. Military strategists across the galaxy began running simulations based on a terrifying premise. If humans could domesticate apex predators through emotional manipulation and genetic modification, what would prevent them from attempting the same approach with sentient species? The thought kept entire planetary defense committees awake during their rest cycles, staring into the cosmic dark and wondering if humanity's seemingly innocent interest in interspecies diplomacy might be the opening move in the most sophisticated conquest strategy ever devised. Archaeological evidence suggested that humans had been perfecting these techniques for millennia, turning their homeworld into a testing ground for approaches that could potentially be applied on a galactic scale. Every domesticated predator represented not just a conquered species, but a proof of concept for humanity's ability to reshape other life forms according to their preferences and needs. As the full scope of humanity's biological conquest became clear, one inescapable conclusion emerged. Any species capable of turning the galaxy's apex predators into enthusiastic servants possessed capabilities that transcended conventional understanding of power and dominance. The question facing the galactic community was no longer whether humans were dangerous. The question was whether it was already too late to do anything about it. The Council declared the human species dangerous after watching the galaxy's deadliest predator sit calmly at their feet. The emergency session of the Intergalactic Council had convened in the most secure chamber available, a reinforced bunker buried 3 kilometers beneath the surface of a heavily fortified moon, surrounded by enough military hardware to sterilize a small solar system. The location choice reflected the gravity of the situation, though several council members privately wondered if even these precautions would prove adequate against a species that had, apparently, mastered the art of turning apex predators into willing accomplices. Chancellor Vorthak of the Hegemony opened the session with the sort of grim formality typically reserved for declaring war against cosmic horrors or announcing the heat death of the universe. His 7 eyes swept across the assembled representatives of 43 different civilizations, each species united by a common thread of existential terror that transcended their usual petty territorial disputes. "Distinguished colleagues," Vorthak began, his translator struggling to convey the appropriate level of bureaucratic dread, "we are gathered to address what our xenobiological experts have classified as a Class Omega threat to galactic civilization. The evidence before us suggests that humanity represents a danger unlike any we have previously encountered." The holographic displays around the chamber activated, projecting the accumulated research data in all its horrifying glory. Surveillance footage of humans casually interacting with domesticated Vrex played alongside historical records of their systematic conquest of every dangerous predator on their homeworld. The visual evidence painted a picture so fundamentally disturbing that several representatives had requested sedatives before viewing it. Ambassador Clethvar of the Crystalline Dominions raised a manipulator appendage with a sort of trembling motion that suggested their species' equivalent of barely controlled panic. "Chancellor, with respect, are we entirely certain this evidence is authentic? The implications seem improbable." Dr. Vexthara, attending as the Council's expert witness, responded with the weary tone of someone who had spent weeks trying to convince herself that the data was somehow fabricated. "The evidence has been verified through 17 different analytical protocols. The humans have indeed achieved complete domestication of apex predators through methods that our best minds cannot fully comprehend." The council chamber fell silent except for the nervous clicking of chitinous appendages and the occasional involuntary whimper from species whose flight responses had evolved beyond conscious control. The weight of this revelation pressed down upon the assembled representatives, like the gravitational field of a collapsing star. Representative Zik Stala of the Void Confederacy voiced what everyone was thinking but no one wanted to acknowledge. If they can domesticate Vrex, what prevents them from attempting the same techniques on us? This question triggered what historians would later describe as the Great Panic of 2387. Several representatives began making urgent communications with their home worlds, presumably to initiate emergency evacuation protocols. The Thrakari delegate activated what appeared to be some sort of personal defense system, surrounding himself with a shimmering energy field that hummed ominously. 3 different species simultaneously began chanting what their translators identified as traditional death prayers. Chancellor Vorthak restored order through the simple expedient of threatening to eject anyone who couldn't maintain proper diplomatic composure into the nearest black hole. The threat carried particular weight given that the Council had recently installed a convenient black hole disposal system specifically for handling unruly delegates. "The question before us," Vorthak continued, once the chamber had returned to a manageable level of controlled terror, "is not whether humanity poses a threat. The evidence clearly demonstrates capabilities that exceed our ability to counter through conventional means. The question is how we respond to this threat before they decide to expand their collection." The debate that followed would have been entertaining if it weren't focused on preventing galactic extinction. Various species proposed increasingly desperate solutions, ranging from preemptive military strikes to offering themselves as voluntary subjects for human domestication experiments in hopes of receiving preferential treatment. The Altarians suggested attempting diplomatic negotiations, proposing to offer humanity tribute in exchange for promises not to turn them into pet projects. This suggestion was quickly dismissed when someone pointed out that the humans might interpret such offers as invitations to begin the domestication process. The Zephyrian military faction advocated for immediate military intervention, arguing that humanity's threat potential required decisive action before they could extend their influence beyond their current territory. This proposal died when their own strategic analysts admitted that any species capable of domesticating apex predators had probably developed military capabilities that would make direct confrontation inadvisable. The philosophical implications proved even more disturbing than the practical concerns. If humans could reshape apex predators according to their preferences, what did that suggest about the nature of consciousness, free will, and species autonomy? Had the domesticated Vrex chosen their servitude, or had humans simply become so sophisticated at psychological manipulation that their subjects believed they had made free choices? Dr. Keltax presented the most unsettling possibility, that humans had developed their domestication techniques not through technological advancement, but through an intuitive understanding of psychological dominance that suggested they were themselves apex predators, operating on a level that transcended conventional predatory behavior. Consider the evidence, Dr. Keltax explained to the increasingly disturbed assembly. Humans don't hunt their prey and consume them. They convince their prey to serve them willingly, to find fulfillment in that service, and to defend their captors against potential threats. They've created a form of predation so sophisticated that their victims have become willing collaborators in their own subjugation. This observation triggered another wave of panic as representatives began contemplating whether their own species might already be showing early signs of domestication. Several delegates reported experiencing positive emotional responses to human cultural exports, raising alarming questions about whether humanity's influence was already spreading through subtle psychological conditioning. The vote, when it finally came, was unanimous, in a way that transcended political boundaries, species differences, and traditional rivalries. 43 different civilizations, many of whom had been actively plotting each other's destruction mere days before, found themselves united by a shared recognition of humanity's threat potential. The formal declaration read, "By unanimous consent of the Intergalactic Council, humanity is hereby classified as the most dangerous species in known space, possessing capabilities that pose an existential threat to galactic civilization. All member species are advised to exercise extreme caution in any interactions with human representatives, and to report any signs of unusual emotional attachment to human cultural products or individuals." The classification carried unprecedented implications. Humanity would be subject to the most restrictive diplomatic protocols ever devised. Their movements would be monitored by the combined intelligence apparatus of 43 civilizations. Any expansion beyond their current territory would trigger automatic military response from the largest coalition in galactic history. The irony of the situation was not lost on the more philosophically inclined council members. Here were the galaxy's most advanced civilizations, commanding technology that could reshape matter at the subatomic level and harness the energy of entire stars, cowering in fear of a species whose most notable achievement appeared to be convincing dangerous animals to fetch sticks and perform tricks for treats. As the emergency session concluded and representatives began making hasty departures to their respective homeworlds, none of them noticed the small human diplomatic vessel requesting permission to dock at the station's main port. The vessel's manifest listed its crew as consisting of one human ambassador and her emotional support companion, a classification that the station's automated systems had processed without question. Ambassador Chen of the Human Colonial Authority stepped off her ship, accompanied by what appeared to be a perfectly ordinary Vrex, displaying the sort of calm confidence that suggested it had never encountered a situation it couldn't handle with minimal effort. She carried herself with the relaxed demeanor of someone who had never doubted her species' place in the cosmic order, blissfully unaware that she had just been declared the galaxy's most dangerous individual by unanimous vote of the most powerful civilizations in known space. The station's security sensors tracked her progress through the corridors, noting how other species representatives seemed to develop sudden urgent business elsewhere whenever she approached. She attributed this to the usual diplomatic awkwardness that accompanied first contact protocols, never suspecting that her mere presence was triggering evacuation procedures throughout the facility. As she settled into the diplomatic quarters that had been hastily prepared for her visit, her Vrex companion arranged itself comfortably on the floor beside her chair, displaying the sort of casual contentment that had convinced the galaxy's apex predators that serving humanity was the most fulfilling possible existence. Somewhere in the depths of the heavily fortified bunker, 43 civilizations' representatives were frantically coordinating the most comprehensive defense strategy in galactic history, united by their shared terror of humanity's incomprehensible power to transform apex predators into willing servants. And in her quarters above, Ambassador Chen was wondering why the local cuisine options seemed so limited, and whether anyone could recommend a good park where she could take her companion for a walk. After all, even in the depths of space, everyone needed a little exercise and fresh air. The galaxy's most dangerous predator had arrived, and she was asking about recreational facilities.